So now that you are refueled and refreshed, it's time to get back in your seats as Dr. James Koltes tells us why precision dairy is no passing fad and why it's here to stay. He's an assistant professor in animal breeding and dairy genetics at Iowa State University and was previously assistant professor at the University of Arkansas. James has worked on genomics research in a variety of species, often at the interface between molecular and quantitative computational genetics. His work includes the development of bioinformatics resources and methods to better define what parts of the genome are functional and potentially important for use in livestock breeding. He received his bachelor's degree in dairy science and genetics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a PhD in genetics from Iowa State University. Join me in welcoming Dr. James Koltes.
Thank you for the introduction, Peggy. It's a pleasure to be here today, and the title of my talk is Precision Dairy is Here to Stay, but what I really want to emphasize is that the future of precision dairy is really promising. And so I hope through what I share with you today, I'll give you some perspective of what's on the horizon. We'll talk a bit about the feed intake project, but we'll also talk a little bit more broadly about precision technologies. And last year when Steven Sievert gave a talk, I think he did a great job about talking about challenges and applications and a lot of the nitty-gritty of trying to use this sort of data. I'm going to try to be a little bit more visionary. I'll give you some examples that are out there in industry, some examples that are kind of primed, I think, in research to take hold soon. So let's start out being on the same page. What is precision dairy data? Or at least for my talk today, what's the definition? And so this isn't going to encompass all of the data that's out there. Frankly, one of the points I'm going to make is that I probably can't cover everything because the field is moving so fast. But wearable sensors are one technology, such as ear tags, high-throughput lab tests, such as the milk testing, milk spectral testing that we do at DHIA or in other locations, images or picture data that's available in some research settings and is starting to become used in various livestock industries. I'm talking about data, precision data being frequently collected. So for example, ear tag data could be collected every few minutes. Certain samples may be tested with every milk testing. We may have certain sensors like imaging data that are actually collecting information every second. And it may be filtered down to a more informative set of information, but the idea is it's this constantly collected data on an individual cow. Often this data is available in what you'll hear is real time. That means a lot of different things, and I've kind of laid that out with some of these different types of technologies. And I would say that today some of the more prominent and advanced uses are in estrus detection, and lots of folks are hopeful that it'll be very helpful in health detection, and it is being used in the industry today to help pull cows that may appear to be close to becoming sick or have a health event. What kind of technologies are out there? I gave you sort of a rough overview. Really, there are a lot of different things. There are what we call these sort of Internet of Things, these individual wearable sensors that animals can wear that measure everything from activity and what's going on during calving to what's going on in the rumen in terms of maybe pH or activity in that rumen or the temperature of the rumen. There are also imaging technologies, like I just mentioned, so some people are trying to use this now to measure feed intake. It's in its early stages, but coming along looks very promising. Trying to measure the heat lost from animals or body temperature. And then, of course, we've got this whole slew of robotic data that's out there, and I couldn't capture all of them, but just to throw a few up there, these different machines are capturing sometimes hundreds of different data points, or more than 100 data points per cow per milking. So this is the kind of big data we're talking about. Really, it's just data, but the sort of big information that we can get. So milk spectral data is another really interesting and promising source of data. So when we get the milk component information for folks that use DHIA testing, we're using a spectrophotometer in the lab. It's measuring the wavelength of light as it interacts with the sample. And we get this profile of 1,000 or so different spectra that can be used, in part, some of those are used to measure the different milk components, lactose, and other things. But that information could be used for a lot more. And some colleagues have started working on this. This is an example from the Netherlands, looking at ketosis. Some of my colleagues have done this work at Wisconsin, also looking at different measurements to try to evaluate ketosis. And then another colleague on the FAR feed efficiency grant who's been mentioned before today, Rob Templeman, has been looking at a number of different applications for milk spectral data, including trying to diagnose pregnancy, which is a very hot topic recently. And there are many, many more applications that are being proposed and many, many more technologies. But I think maybe some of the important things we ought to ask are, what other information is there? Because there's sort of the basic things, like we might think, a lame cow is not maybe moving as much as she should, but what sort of signals are coming off before that animal becomes lame? Maybe there's some other information source that might hint to that so that we can intervene and prevent losses before they occur. What measurements make good proxies? So for today, for feed efficiency, what sort of different sensor data can we use to pick up which animals differ in feed intake and thereafter based on their efficiency? Can we combine different types of data? And this is one of the kind of pioneering areas right now, or the areas that really needs to be improved upon, is how do we start to integrate different information sources to better monitor animals, either predict things or, for example, be able to use that information not only for things like genetics, but also for management. And then what do we want to achieve with precision technologies? And I think there's an awful lot that's been proposed. I want to give you a little bit of a snapshot of maybe what's out there. Before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about, at least my opinion, for what a vision for precision dairy could look like. So we've got all of these different streams of on-farm data from the parlor, from feed ingredients, reproduction data, health data, management data, behavioral information, genetics, expenditures, economics, probably lots of other things, weather data we could imagine could go along with a farm. All of that information can be stored and used. And in the quick term, in the real-time term, I think one of the more exciting things is that could be used for management interventions. So in more of the real time or more of the immediate kind of time moving forward, can we take that data, develop predictive analytics, and then put out actionable items, not this is what you must do, but these are risk factors that you can use in your decision-making process as a producer, hopefully, that provide good information and solid precision in what needs to be done. On the backside of this, while we're going through this process, there's also the opportunity to save data, send it off to a research cluster or a computing center, and use that for research down the road. And this is where we're going to talk about things like how we would like to use precision data to improve feed efficiency. Before I move forward, I want to talk a little bit about some of the elephants in the room, like who's going to benefit from this data and where the value is generated. And in particular, I want to make the point that I think the dairy industry has always been a leader in sharing data, being very cooperative, and making a lot of use and generating a lot of innovation from sharing data, from pedigree information to different milking records, reproductive data, more recently genotypes. And this has driven progress in so many areas, especially in genetics, in the dairy industry, that has allowed it to really lead the other livestock species. And with that, I hope certainly that will be a continued trend with precision technologies. Along those lines, I think it's important to realize what precision technologies can and can't do, and always worry a little bit about the hype cycle and what maybe is being said versus what's reality. Something important, I think, is that we're providing a lot of information from these technologies that can be gleaned. There's an awful lot of data that needs to be distilled to something useful, again, actionable items for folks to make decisions with. But a key piece is that information is not knowledge or wisdom, and these technologies can't do what an experienced producer can do. It takes background, it takes information about a dairy, how a dairy runs, it takes information about how that specific dairy runs to be able to use this information to really drive forward progress on a farm, at least from a real-time management kind of a situation. And I think a great example is one that Daniel Bruckmans from KU Leuven in Belgium told me about. It was in the development of a specific type of sensor, so he likes to use image data. And his researchers were working on ways to diagnose lameness. And so they got all of these engineers together. They came up with these great algorithms. They can parse out that animal's silhouette from video data. They can look at all the different angles, all the different information. I don't remember the exact amount of accuracy that they had in predicting lameness, but it was somewhere around the order of 50 to 70%. They talked to one farmer, and he said, well, why don't you look at the arch in the back of that animal? And in fact, in doing so, what they realized is that that was kind of the silver bullet they were missing in the mix. And suddenly their prediction accuracy jumped up between 95% and 100. So really that was a critical moment in realizing this need for collaborative discussions and that it's not just this is what the information is. It takes an informed decision, people with experience to move it forward. So where are precision technologies headed? And I certainly can't hit everything, but I hit a number of interesting topics, I think, for folks in this room. One potential use is to select ideal animals for robot milking, and so I'm thinking kind of in the terms of both genetics and management here. Of course, those involved in that area know this has already been done. Monitoring calving and predicting problems, there are sensors that do that. How well, I'm not sure, but there are sensors out there that do that. Early detection of heat stress, lots of people working with image data, different devices to try to detect heat stress before it happens to mitigate it. Of course, we're going to talk about predicting feed intake today. We just gave an example of predicting lameness. Early identification of illness in calves. This isn't so much in the industry yet, or at least not that I'm aware of. Somebody may correct me, but this is certainly a hot area in the research field right now. Other things, automated body condition score measurements, already being done. Early detection of metabolic disease. Colleagues from the University of Wisconsin working on this and other places. Early detection of mastitis. Awful lot of research being done with spectral data. Lots of other types of these sensor technologies. Maybe something I haven't seen as much about, but I'm sure is on a lot of people's mind. Early signs of frailty or need to cull an animal early on. Another potential tool. My point is the future to some degree is now. A lot of this information is already being used or in a very good situation in the research field to be used fairly soon. Where I think the real future is, again, comes back to this idea of data integration. And so I hope this isn't an intergalactic kind of idea. I don't think Victor Cabrera would feel that way. But there's this Dairy Brain project where researchers are looking at how do we combine all of these different types of data from the industry to help calculate risk factors and give producers a dashboard to be able to better make informed decisions. And then this sort of integration, I think, is really the future that we're going for. The challenge in all of this, to me, right now, comes down to more logistics. There are a lot of opportunities still to improve predictive analytics, but a lot of the early predecessors of getting this done are out there. So there's a lot of hope. We're not quite there yet, but there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of really good different prediction models and systems in place. What are other industries doing? And I think it's always interesting to take a look and see what the other livestock groups are doing. So I'll just give you two examples that I think are quite interesting. There's a company that got a grant from FFAR to actually look at facial recognition of chicks as a way of deploying vaccinations to individual animals. Fascinating idea. It'd be hard to believe you could tell the difference in those faces, but apparently you can. And we'll see if this works or not. No. So in pigs, in swine, there are researchers at the University of Nebraska that are doing something kind of similar. They're tracking movements and activities and using that to distill different information from video data and different types of sensors to figure out how that might be related to feed intake, how that might be related to health and other aspects of welfare in swine. I wish I could show you that picture. It was very cool. Image of what they're doing. So moving forward, I've given you some ideas of what technology is out there. Let's talk a little bit more about the management side. Again, I've got these slides to talk a little bit about where we can take sort of actionable items from a management perspective versus what we could do from a genetics perspective. I think both are very interesting. In terms of management, just as an example, we could imagine that we have some type of ear tag sensor, perhaps that's picking up temperature, and we might be able to detect some anomaly that gives us advance warning of mastitis. Of course, that would be a wonderful thing, especially if we could pull animals early, do some kind of intervention, reduce the amount of time that an animal is on an antibiotic. A great aspect there, is not only that we can save money in terms of limiting that milk production loss, but also from a consumer good kind of standpoint, we can also say we're working on reducing antibiotic use. There's also a lot of hidden information that can be dissected from these different sensors, and some of that may be useful for understanding daily management routines. So if we looked at different measurements from an animal in terms of their temperature, The rumen temperature is quite interesting. We might be able to infer water intake, for example, on that animal. Are they getting adequate water? We might be able to infer feeding times, movement to the parlor, and there may be a whole host of other kinds of different things we could potentially monitor. So what would be the value of predicting feed intake ahead of time? So imagine we had, again, some kind of technology where we were measuring activity and we were looking over our days in milk at our cows and saying that we could find some statistical association with feed intake and predict feed intake maybe 10 days in advance or 7 days in advance. I'm sure there's lots of folks in the room who could think about different ways that you could manage your feed inventory better, how you might be able to use this to identify an illness before it occurs, and probably a number of other ideas. So a lot of these things are also, applications are ways that could be used in genetic evaluation. But let's talk about, again, some specific examples now towards breeding. What kind of traits? Of course, we're here to talk about feed efficiency today. So feed efficiency and water intake would be wonderful. Cow health, calving and calf health traits. And a very interesting one, I think, is accounting for differences across different regions and thinking about what geneticists call genotype by environment interaction. How do animals react in a hot environment versus a cool environment, or maybe a pasture versus a more conventional style dairy, or at high altitude or low altitude. This is an area where sensors give us that individual cow measure phenotype and unique traits that may be otherwise hard to measure. And there are likely lots and lots and lots of other examples we could talk about. So why use precision technologies to predict feed intake? And what sensors are out there that would really make this amenable and a doable thing across the industry? But before I jump directly into that, I want to back up 1 second and talk about the rationale behind why our collaborative research group is interested in using sensors and milk spectral data to predict feed intake. So as everyone knows, feed is the most expensive cost on the farm, right up there with labor. The equipment to measure feed intake, Heather showed you a number of those instruments are quite expensive. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, not something we're going to put in a commercial dairy typically. Ideally, we need measurement tools for feed efficiency that are portable, inexpensive, available on a large number of commercial dairies, and something that would be widely used or is already widely applied in the dairy industry. Now, ideally, some precision data could act as proxies, or what we call indicator traits, of feed intake. And today we're quite lucky that there are a lot of cows that are using different types of sensors, and milk spectra is being recorded on, a large portion of the dairy cows in the industry. So in the ideal world, if these different precision measurements are good indicators for feed intake, they would be extremely helpful because we can measure them on lots of cows across the industry and at hopefully a limited cost. So just kind of as you would think, more data on more cows allows for improved accuracy and feed efficiency, at least in theory. So what makes a sensor a good indicator trait? And I'm not going to hit all of the points, but let's just look kind of briefly. So we need to see a consistent association with feed intake. In this case, I'm just modeling feed intake with maybe some panel of milk spectral data. So we have a pretty tight prediction line in red that says, okay, as the one feed intake is going up, these different sensor measurements may be going up in their measure as well. So we'd have a very low p-value or a high statistical significance with that ideally. And we would also have a favorable relationship with other traits of interest in selection. And I apologize, when I put this slide together, I was thinking of feed efficiency. So if you think of this in terms of feed efficiency for this example, if this is feed efficiency going up and the more efficient animals are here, as that sensor measure goes up, we would hope that with other traits that we're selecting for, like different health incidents, mastitis, whatnot, that we're hopefully seeing trends in the genetic data that are going down. We hope to see that kind of a relationship. With other traits, for milk production, for example, we might hope to either see no relationship or maybe an increase. So we need to evaluate what all of those relationships are with the different traits that we use in selection from our various indexes. And of course, we need adequate variability, and ideally, if we're going to use this in genetics, we of course want these measures to have heritability. So what different things are we looking to measure? So we're using a special kind of sensor to measure core body temperature within a cedar. It's called an eye button. We're going to use rumen boluses to measure rumen temperature and activity. Milking collar systems to look at daily activity, which might also get us at behavior and maybe a little bit about locomotion. Ear tag technologies to look at temperature and activity, maybe also some rumination data. Imaging technologies we're working on getting established right now, hopefully to get some behavioral information. We're hoping that's going to work out. Body weight data, certainly on these animals. Their weight loss and weight gain is an important part, as was mentioned by the previous speakers, in their energy use. And then milk samples. Again, we talked about milk spectral data and the potential of using that as a predictor. We've got lots of folks using that information, and importantly, it looks really promising. So there have been a number of groups, including colleagues at the University of Wisconsin, that have looked at milk spectral data and seen associations and some fairly high accuracies in predicting feed intake. Lots and lots of folks, I think, are going to start doing this. We've already seen a group, collaborative group from Norway and Ireland that have done this, found a similar association. So our goals are really to increase the database, to increase the amount of data that we have to more effectively predict feed efficiency. So we're going to add 3,600 cows, as was mentioned before, with feed intake data. Those animals will be genotyped. We'll have our array of different sensors that will be used as proxies, again, indicators of feed intake, hopefully, again, highly associated, and hopefully some of these are related to our other traits in ways that we want to see on about 3,000 animals, which will allow us, again, to identify these statistical relationships with feed intake and efficiency and develop equations, hopefully, that will start to combine and integrate data to leverage more data types, with this idea being that the more different types of data we get, hopefully, we develop a more accurate prediction scheme. So the goal from where we are today, where we just have feed intake data, is to combine that feed intake data, and again, we're going to bolster that, with our sensor measurements, our milk spectral data, and hopefully boost our accuracy of prediction. Ideally, again, these sensors, milk spectral data is being used widely in the industry. If that works, we can rapidly use information from the industry, from commercial herds, to again bolster the data, which should hopefully further help us boost our accuracy above just the feed intake data alone. And develop our feed intake index equations that allow us to use not only that feed intake data that's important, still very important, that's being developed on university herds and other reference herds, along with sensor information, whichever ones that may be, and spectral data potentially. The big added benefit of this, and has come up multiple times, is the potential to look at animal health. And in some of our preliminary data at Iowa State, one thing that we see with sensor data is that there appears to be a relationship, not surprisingly, both with health and feed efficiency. And so that would be a wonderful thing to be able to share with the industry. We're improving not only the efficiency of these animals, but also their health and welfare. That's the goal, the hope. So some take-home points that I want to make today. Uses for sensor data are rapidly evolving and expanding. And the dairy industry has certainly got lots of different types of sensors, precision measurements that are out there to take advantage of. A lot of them are kind of poised for use. Some of them are starting to be used in the field, but that next step at getting at prediction is still maybe just coming to fruition, or just about to come to fruition. We've got many different types of sensors and milk spectral data being used widely in the US, so it's a nice set of tools to potentially use to expand and use commercial data to predict other traits like feed intake. Prediction tools are rapidly being developed, hopefully to assist in farmer decisions, to create a tool to assist in evaluating risk factors and how to improve animal welfare and profitability. Sensor measurements and milk spectral data are being used today to develop feed intake prediction tools, especially on the spectral side. The sensor measurements are a bit more tentative, but they're starting to come out. We're starting to see those reports with rumination data, activity, and temperature. Spectral data appear to have some pretty decent predictive power, and it'll be interesting. There's a lot more details that need to be worked out. I'm giving you the very sunny side of this. Doing this across the entire population is a little bit harder than it may appear from face value, but it appears very, very promising. Sensor data also appears promising, and so I didn't show data today, but from Iowa State, we've been working with some different wearable sensors, and tentatively, we're seeing with at least small numbers some associations with feed intake data. And again, the overall goal of this project is to really harness the different rich data that are available and identify these indicator traits, these proxies from sensors that collect this rich information over time on an individual cow basis to better predict feed intake with higher accuracy than we can today, again, by adding this additional data. With that, I need to acknowledge, again, our funding from FAR and from the CDCB, and certainly all of our colleagues within the feed efficiency team from the various universities, from USDA, from CDCB, for wonderful suggestions and comments. With that, I'd entertain your questions. Thank you.